Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is June the 16th, 2026. I apologize for the creaking of the chair. I'm sitting on an old wooden chair, so yeah. And I'm doing this video in black and white, so how appropriate. In any event, I thought I'd switch gears a bit. I've been, doing videos, and again, they've been heavy, and I don't want to inundate the channel with criticisms of the government of America. And so I thought it's time to say why I love America. I've done earlier videos saying why I love America. Today, the theme is I love America because I was the number one pick as a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow. And this is true. So, the John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow is a leadership development program, right? It's in the Department of Defense to be future leaders of the Department of Defense for uh, recent graduates of graduate degree programs. It could be PhD, JD. Of course, I got into the program 2 years, within 2 years after I graduated with my JD, my Doctor of Law degree from George Washington University. And I was surprised the way they reached out to me. Somebody reached out to me saying they came across my resume and they thought I should, apply for this program, that I'd be a good fit for the government. And, I was, I applied for it. And throughout the process, they were exceedingly nice to me. It was during the COVID process, right? And, they told me about it, about the program, the objective of the program, how it was to enhance the caliber of, the quality of people who go into the federal government, the federal civil service. All sorts of people do get to go into the federal government, but normally these are appointments, political appointments, so at the higher tier. So they wanted people to be able to go in, peak, get into the federal civil service as a career. They wanted like top of the tier, top line people to go in as, you know, um, and build a career instead of being political appointments, right? And, so they wanted a pipeline from the get go. Just try and again make the federal civil service, as prestigious as, what they have in the UK. By the way, I think I should do a video because I've mentioned this several times how the United Kingdom, UK has a very prestigious civil service. So in fact, the civil service in the UK, right, they have a different form of government, by the way. They don't have a federal government like we do. They have a unitary form of government in the UK, but they have a mixed economy. They don't call themselves capitalists, so they have a huge welfare state, right? But they have a very prestigious civil service in the UK because they go and recruit. They typically recruit from elite schools, right? The elite schools, and so the public service is more prestigious than their private sector. And I guess also because, of course, they have a monarch, right, the king, and so civil servants are serving, in the government of His Majesty the King, right? So I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why it makes it really prestigious, and it's, of course, it's remarkably old, right? It's remarkably old. The monarchy is what, a thousand years. And very and continuous. It's remarkably old, and they're really serving the government of the serving their sovereign. So America, of course, we've since Jimmy Carter, we've tried to enhance the prestige of our civil service because our nation, our economy, our nation is really driven by the private sector, right? So the private sector is what drives America. Today, we've created a trillionaire, right? Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, and he's a trillionaire. And we've had this pattern of doing that. So our private sector is more prestigious than our government, right? So in fact, back in the day, you heard of the robber barons from the 19th century. Politicians, the government, civil servants were pawns, were said to be pawns of, you know, private business people, right? The robber barons, people who had become billionaires, and their wealth was a portion, a significant percentage of the government's revenues, right? The government's receipts. Not so the kingdom of, not so Great Britain, right? Great Britain has had its monarchy, its lands. You know, the king, all the lands, most of the lands in England are theoretically the king's, right? And so when you're serving in his government, so he's, you know, he's really a public servant, the number one public servant, uh, or the people are serving him, right? Because he's their sovereign, right? So they swear allegiance. But you can see a reason why the British civil service, the Brit working in the British government, is really prestigious, unlike in the U.S., where you know, in the beginning it was, you know, private people in private business were the ones who were running our government. George Washington came with his prestige of being somebody in private business. He was a very wealthy planter. Thomas Jefferson, he was a wealthy man as well, who became our third president. And John Adams was a prominent lawyer. And you know, so people have come from the private sector in America, right? So people who have distinguished themselves in the private sector go and give their experience in public service. Of course, I'm talking about those are the highest levels. And while in the civil service in the U.S., they had the patronage system, the spoil system, which was known to be notoriously corrupt, right? It was notoriously corrupt. So that has sort of it's haunted the image of our civil service. That one, it started off not having qualified people, right? It was notoriously corrupt up to the point that a job seeker, right, Charles Guiteau, the deranged lawyer, would actually assassinate our 20th president, James Garfield, because he was offended that Garfield hadn't given him a civil service job, a job he wanted. He wanted to be a diplomat or something, right? So, and that led the 21st President Chester A. Arthur to reform the civil service, the Pendleton Act, to make sure that qualified people went into our civil service. But of course, every time, you know, it's our civil service has also had that pendulum swing, right? Ebbs and flows, just like our race relations in America. And so it starts off good, and then it goes bad again after the period of the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression, FDR increased the size of the government, right? So our government wasn't so large before, right? It was really small. But with the Great Depression, the civil service sort of became it sort of became a fail-safe mechanism to ward off unemployment, right? And you know, disaster in the economy, because then there was robbery. So the federal government basically was hiring people who were unemployed, and it sort of became a welfare. You know, the federal government basically became this huge welfare trough, right, to prevent unemployment. And over time, um, you know, Carter tried, implemented some reforms again, right? During his presidency, and of course, he introduced the senior executive service. Um, but with the travesty of David J. Rush, the CIA guy who snuck in without a degree, fabricating his entire resume and made it all the way to the senior executive service. So you see that there's still corruption, entrenched corruption. It's even looking like our federal government, at least from the those in the national security, that it's like there's a kakistocracy, right? There's a kakistocracy, and the bureaucracy is just similar to the apparatchiks in that USSR was known for. But in any event, provided a little bit of history regarding our civil service, and so I got into the John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow program, and I was the number one pick. If you look at you can Google it, John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow program for the Department of Defense to be senior leaders, future senior leaders, future leaders of the Department of Defense. You will find in the current cohort, right, there's not a single black person, not a single black person in it. Not that it makes me elated or makes me feel special. No, just trying to narrate my experience. So there's not a single black person there, not a single Asian person, right? But the program picks people from prestigious schools, elite schools, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, all that stuff, right? The Ivy Leagues, the West Points and whatnot, right? And now, so I love America considering the fact that I didn't have any connections, and I got into this prestigious federal government program, that was created by Congress, right, to boost the prestige of the federal civil service, the Department of Defense specifically. By the way, the Department of Defense is half the size of the government of the United States, right? About half of it, right? So the employees, people in the Department of Defense, constitute about 3 million people, right? When I was there, I think we're about hovers between 2.9 million and 3.1 million people. That's half the size of the entire US government. And then, of course, our budget. Everybody knows that the budget is about $850 billion. And the current administration was asking for a new budget of $1.5 trillion. So we're probably going to go over the $1 trillion budget, right? So we're half the size of the US government. So it was an honor to be the number one pick, right? Makes me love. Of course, I love America. I didn't have anybody. I hadn't served in the military before. I didn't have anybody to pick up the phone and call someone, a big shot in the Department of Defense or a general to put me in the program. No, it was supposed to be merit based. They looked at my resume and they kind of liked me, and I was fortunate. Why wouldn't I love America, right? That's how it's done in the country that I come from Nigeria, right, and many other parts, right. You require connections, family connections, and by the way, in America, I've really focused on my education. I've focused because I had no plans on staying here, right. I'm a citizen now, right, but my because you again, when you come as an F1 student on an F1 non-immigrant visa, right, you are not entitled to get a green card. And when you get a green card, you're not entitled to become a citizen, right? There's a pathway that America created that you can go from that to become an American citizen, but you're not entitled to it, right? It's, if you're fortunate that, America considers you and says, okay, yes, this is the sort of person we want. So I went through that whole process, and then I got into their most prestigious civilian leadership development program in the Department of Defense, their biggest agency department in the U.S. federal government. And I didn't just get in, I was a number one pick. Why wouldn't I love America? Of course, every day I was like saying, I love America. Well, until, right, distinctively or ironically or paradoxically, I became the only person ever to be terminated from the McCain Fellowship, right? At least the first, you know. Um, so see how they bust my bubble so easily, right? But one good thing is I would find out after the termination letter, right, that they didn't know who terminated me. If the person who sent the letter said denied that she terminated me, when there's a department that you call the DOD for verification and all that stuff, and they told me no, I'm not terminated. I'm active duty. It was shocking. And then eventually I got money in my bank account. They put money, and then eventually the lawyers. So for the good thing is you have rights in federal government work, right? You have rights of due process, unlike the private sector. In the federal government, you have a property interest, you have rights of due process. They can't just terminate you like that arbitrarily, right? They can only terminate you for cause. So eventually, lawyers now got in touch with me and said, "Well, you've not been terminated, right? You've not been terminated, but if you we'll give you $5,000 if you voluntarily resign." So this whole termination business, by the way, nobody could come out and say they terminated me. The person who wrote the termination letter was a black woman who apparently was acting like a mini mentor, had reported misconduct of somebody I was working with, and the shenanigans that was going on, and I thought there was fraud going on. I reported stuff, so I didn't know about all of this whistleblower thing. So that's whistleblowing, right? Uh, if you report misconduct in the federal government, right, they cannot retaliate against you. They can't they can't terminate you or do things or downgrade you or give you a bad performance review and things like that, because it will be retaliation and a violation of Whistleblower Protection Act. So here I was being sexually harassed by the person I was working with, and constantly trying to seduce me, flirt with me, trying to get me to go out with her. And I told my friend, and also I was experiencing discrimination regarding certain things. And of course, I found I was experiencing fraud, a hostile work environment. By the way, I had COVID at this time, and I was working like a dog, right? I work hard. So I had COVID at this time. By the way, the federal government also had uh, this law, this rule that you couldn't terminate anyone who had COVID, right, unless they were unqualified. So it turns out anyway that they said, well, they didn't terminate me, right? They didn't terminate me. It was a letter. Nobody knew where the order came from. One person knew. And so I came to learn about the entrenched public corruption in our government, in the US federal government. And so I'm not that I want to make it a cause of mine, right? And by the way, I would get another position, right, in the Department of Defense. I would get another position, within a month. And so I had an opportunity to be able to appeal it, and that was going on. But in order to, and so they wanted to get into talks with me, mediation and all that. They offered me $5,000, everything. They wanted me to end the my complaint and all that stuff. And of course, I've talked about how I was raided, right? So eventually, the evidence indicates that it was these rogue senior executives that I reported who, turned out some of them are predators who abuse the office of the, federal government, the DOD, their position to extort quid pro quo relationships and whatnot, and to just do misconduct and look for somebody who's going to um, join their ring to defraud the American people, the US government. And when you resist it, then they demonize you, villainize you. They make you, of course, I'm a black person, they make you the boogeyman. So you have to be very careful. So not every, my friend used to say, not every gift is a present, right? And there's the saying, beware of Greeks who beg gifts. So in any event, that's another story. But I was the number one pick in the McCain Fellow. If you look again on the John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellows website, you'll see there's not a single black person, not a single Asian there, just all white. They're highly qualified and very impressive, but the fact that I didn't have somebody in the military to pick up the phone, pull some strings to make me a McCain Fellow. It's a very prestigious program. The fact that I didn't have a congressperson or a senator, pull strings for me, or a billionaire or a diplomat pull strings for me to make me a McCain Fellow. But I was picked. My country, they picked me and said, well, we want you to be a future leader of the Department of Defense, and we're not only putting you in the program, making you a fellow, but you're actually our most qualified, our number one. Well, I don't know if most qualified. They're all eminently qualified, but I was the number one pick. So that's another reason why, of course, I love America. And so when I make videos talking, exposing fraud or the misconduct that I've suffered, right? Um, if we're there, it's not to air, the nation's dirty laundry. No, it's for us to participate in our democracy and make it better. Call for integrity in our federal government and make sure that we are that shining city upon a hill that the whole world looks to. Because we go around the world telling people that, well, their government is corrupt, that their leaders are corrupt, that they have a corrupt civil service. Well, when we have corruption, I found out that we have corruption in the Department of Defense. I don't know about the rest of the civil service, but the thing is, once you enter one arm of the civil service, it's you can move around in the federal. So that's in the federal government. So I saw firsthand that there is a kakistocracy where I worked. Right, unprincipled people who are disqualified and should not be in the United States federal government, and they would go to extremes, right, to cover up their misconduct, right, of how they defraud the American uh, public and how they impugn on the integrity of our system by villainizing, demonizing, violating the civil rights of their colleagues or their subordinates like me, and even to the extent of also getting into a conspiracy to commit bodily harm and or murder, right? I was almost killed on May 16, 2023. Um, Jide the deranged Howard University professor who apparently filed a fabricated and perjured emergency evaluation petition that ostensibly brought, well, they said almost 40 cops, a force, a force of men and women to besiege me and to eventually assault me. Um, he's uh, he's claimed that, well, it was the police, the military, that he got a call that I was fighting people at work. I never fought anybody at work. All a lie. All a lie. And I've still had no trial till today. In the whole interaction, I'm the only person who got injured. And even though I was injured, the police officer who almost killed me were not contrite. They filed false charges against me. And I've been defamed. It's over 3 years now. I haven't had justice. So at least, I can get to speak up, speak about the injustice that I suffered. I can speak about the corruption of my bosses in the federal government. I can speak of the falsification of records of my colleagues, right? And Americans, there are many good Americans that will uh, come out and speak up against the injustices of their government and seek a change as well. The thing is, the corrupt media, right? We see the corporate media has swept this under the rug. They've tried to silence this. They've tried to silence me instead of looking at the corruption. Unfortunately, they don't, the media is not interested in the atrocities that or the injuries by that black men experience until they're dead. God forbid I'm alive and I'll remain alive by God's grace. Um, in any event, so I love America. Because I was the number one pick. I was a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow. It was an honor, and it made me really glad that, wow, I didn't have to know somebody, bribe anybody to be a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow in the Department of Defense. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.